And this is going to be my second Game of Thrones Q&A video. I like to make this a weekly thing, so feel free to mark any comments you'd like to leave for a Q&A in any particular video. Mark it with something like "for the Q&A," and that way I'll be able to see that, so you can kind of tag that, and I'll be glad to use those in Q&A videos in the future. And that goes for Star Wars as well. So with that said, let's get started. And our first question this week comes from Book Nerd Lover, and they write, and thanks for tagging this for the Q&A, by the way. Do you think Quaithe will come back in Season 6? I feel like they missed the mark by only having her in one or two minor scenes. So yeah, I agree totally. I think she should have been in it a little bit more, similar to what she was in the books. For those of you that haven't read the books, Quaithe is a little more prominent in the book. She's constantly popping up places, reminding Dany who she is. She's the one that gives her the prophecy to go forward, you must go back. To touch the light, you must pass through the shadow, and that whole thing. So I may actually do a separate video on Quaithe herself, because there are some interesting theories about who she may or may not be. But honestly, I don't think she'll be back in the show, and I say that for really only one reason. Dany's already got to the point in the show where she is actually essentially captured by this Khalasar that surrounded her in the last episode of Season 5. Just for storytelling reasons, I don't think she's necessary to move the story forward. Again, in the book, she's not a major character, but she does give out this prophecy, and she does constantly pop up through glass candles, essentially a magical device that will enable people to give people visions or talk with people over a distance. And she always reminds Dany, remember who you are. In the books, for example, she's in the Dothraki Sea a lot longer than we saw in the show. She's out there for quite a while by herself, trying to survive with Drogon, and she's actually in a dragon's lair that Drogon hangs out at that she calls Dragonstone. During one of the moments out there when she's alone, she's looking up at the stars and she hears that voice, remember who you are, Daenerys, the dragons know to you. And she looks up and says, Quaithe, are you there, Quaithe? And then she sees her mask in the stars. So that's her communicating through glass candles. So she had a little bit more prominent role in the books, although still not a major character, and also to make us question Dany's past and who she is and what that might mean as far as the prophecy goes. I think they could have used her a little bit more, although again, with the storytelling, it just wasn't completely necessary, so they cut it out for time. And our next question comes from Xyz0917, and they write, so do you think there's a current Night's King in the books? I know HBO gave the White Walkers a leader and named him that, but we haven't seen anything like that in the books as of yet. So yes, in short, I do think there's going to be a Night's King in the books, and I say this only because I think that the show kind of spoiled that little piece of Winds of Winter, and there is a leader of the White Walkers. I don't think it's just a bunch of Craster's sons out there roaming around on their own, doing their own thing. I think that they have to have kind of a leader or a king in order to kind of plan strategy, plan attacks, and that type of thing, because this is, after all, a war. Although they're magical beings and they have this awesome sub-zero ability with ice, and they do fight with ice weapons like any traditional war, they just happen to be able to raise the dead to add to their army. And really, I only say that because every other group in this entire show, every other group, race, tribe, horde, what have you, they all have some kind of lord or some kind of king. I wouldn't think the White Walkers or the others would be any different in that respect. It would, if that's the case, and they are just 20 or 30 or 50 or 1,000 White Walkers roaming around doing their own thing, raising their own little armies, that would be the only faction in this entire world of Ice and Fire that would not have a specific leader or a king. And to make this clear, the current Night's King is not the original Night's King. So the original Night's King was like the 13th commander of the Night's Watch, and he was more than likely a Stark, according to Old Nan. He became Night's King by taking a wife from the others, a female White Walker, and then he called himself king, took refuge in an older Night's Watch castle called the Night's Watch that's since been abandoned, and ruled there for about 13 years before he was defeated. And our next question comes from Bob Murray, and he writes, you mentioned Bride of Fire. It made me think of something. What do you think the significance of Jon's hand being burnt is? It's mentioned in almost all of his chapters. So yeah, I definitely don't think that's by accident. I think there is significance to Jon's hand being burned, and again, for you guys who may not remember, Jon's hand was burned when he picked up the lantern to throw at the White, who were essentially reanimated crows when they had tried to attack Lord Commander Mormont at the time. I think that's significant in a couple ways. First way, I think it's simply hammering into our heads that Jon is somehow related to fire. And of course that goes into the R plus L equals J theory, being that Jon is the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, and he is the Song of Ice and Fire. And also I think it parallels with what happens to Dany later. Now I don't know if this was intentionally planned, but of course in A Dance with Dragons, Dany's hands get burned when she grabs a spear and pulls out of Drogon in the fighting pits. The spear was on fire, and this was dragon fire from Drogon, and she burns her hands before she tames him with her whip and flies off into the Dothraki Sea. So I think it's also kind of a parallel moment as well between Jon and Dany, because as we've seen, there are a lot of parallels between these two characters. And our next question comes from the Isle of Q, and they write, hey Chris, I just found your channel and subscribed. Anyway, I have a question. You mentioned Sam wouldn't have time to become a full-fledged maester. How long does it take to become a full maester? I'm sure the book said it somewhere along the way. I just don't remember, so if you know, let me know. Thanks. So yeah, there's no specific passage in any book that says it takes this long, X number of years or what have you, to be a maester. but there are some references to give you an idea. If you think about the Maester's chain, each link in the chain is forged and represents an area of study. The average Maester has a chain of about 20 or so links. It could be more, it could be less. I would say 20 would be a pretty accurate average as far as Maesters go. And again, each link represents a different area of study. For example, copper is for the study of history, gold is for the study of money or economics, silver is for healing, iron is for warcraft, and many more. And you have some links that can only be granted by an Archmaester, and some links that are a lot more rare. For example, you have black steel, I believe, which represents ravenry, and of course you have Valyrian steel links that represent magic or the occult. 1 out of 100 Maesters may have a Valyrian steel link in their chain. So there were a few examples. Somebody had been there at Old Town studying for a year and already forged, 2 or 3 links in the chain. But there's other ones that say that most links take about a year. So if you're talking about an average of 20 links per Maester, then you're talking about around 20 years to become a full-fledged Maester where you receive the title of Maester from an Archmaester or what have you. So, it's not something where you can just go down for a few years, study a few things and become a Maester. It's a long time study just like anything else. And our final question comes from Roman A, and they write, could you explain to me why Daenerys was immune to fire so early on in the season, way before she even came across the witch? We first saw this when she stepped in the hot bath and later picked up a dragon egg off some hot coals. So yeah, this is still kind of, and pardon the pun, a fiery debate online in some cases, because some things seem to kind of contradict each other as far as her being immune to fire. I still kind of stand by the statement that George R.R. Martin made about 15 years ago. A guy named Robert Shaw interviewed George R.R. Martin, and he asked him, are all Targaryens immune to fire? And his response was, no Targaryens are immune to fire. What happened with Dany was a one-time magical event. Targaryens are fire and heat resistant, but they're not immune to fire. And then I believe a follow-up was something to the effect of, do you think that will happen again? He said, probably not. He kind of gave a definitive answer as far as Targaryens are not, but then again, he left himself a little bit of an out when he said, probably not an overwhelming, hell no, this won't happen again. So we did see in the show and in the books as well that she stepped into the steaming bath and it didn't seem to bother her. She seemed to like it. She did pick up the dragon egg. It didn't burn her hands, but it burned her handmaiden's hands. And then of course we had the magical moment with the blood sacrifice when she burned Drogo in the funeral pyre and hatched her dragon. I still kind of stand by that, but at the same time you have a couple of events that are odd. So in A Dance with Dragons, she does actually get burned. She's in the fighting pits when Drogon comes down and swoops in and starts burning the hell out of everybody and everything. She pulls a spear out of Drogon, who had been speared by the Harpies, and the spear was on fire and she burned her hands. Now this was dragon fire, obviously, because Drogon had been burning people around him. But right before that, Drogon actually shot dragon fire at her. And she didn't burn again, but her hair did, just like the first time. Now, it does say that she kind of ducked out of the way or knelt down, so perhaps it was as simple as she just ducked out of the way of the kind of stream of fire coming out of his mouth, and it just was close enough to catch her hair on fire. When she got out to the Dothraki Sea, she clearly states that this reminds her of the first time. She equates this of her not being burned again with the first time she wasn't burned. It states that her scalp was unburnt. So again, her hair burns off, except for a little bit. It says there were some remnants of hair left. So that's my question for you guys. Do you think this is still true? I mean, I personally do. I mean, that was his word, but then again, he could have changed his tune. I mean, it's been literally 15 or so years. Perhaps he now feels like there are special Targaryens. What do you guys think? Do you think that he has changed his mind on that? Perhaps she is special in some way and can't be burned? Or perhaps it's just dragon fire she can be burned by and not regular fire. I think back to the scene in the Hardhome episode of season 5 where the White Walker walked through the flames. His magical abilities just kind of push the flames out of the way. Do you think that's the way it works for her? Let me know what you guys think. Again, if you want to see these kind of weekly Q&A videos for Game of Thrones and Star Wars, feel free to comment on any video that you want and tag that, for the Q&A. And I'll be able to see that easier and use that in a Q&A video, and I'll be glad to do that. So again, thanks guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to get everything. I'll be doing some more Star Wars videos as well as Game of Thrones stuff. But in the meantime, you can click here for the little 4-part mini-series I did on the House of the Undying and Dany's visions in there and what they potentially mean. Appreciate all the support, you guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.